Hello everyone, welcome to another discussion video. This video will be talking about working in the industry as a hacker in the area of security. So we have a guest with us today, Droogie, someone we've covered before on the podcast, and he's also a moderator in our Discord, so you can join our Discord, pop in, say hello. We'll start out with saying what we do in terms of working in the industry and some background to set up context for the rest of the discussion. So Droogie, I'll let you introduce yourself and talk about a bit of your background.
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Droogie. I've been working professionally in the information security industry since 2011. Before that, computers and security were more of a hobby that I was doing on the side until I was lucky enough to kind of break into a career. And
All
yeah,
right.
that's a quick intro.
So I'll let you do your little bit of background, Z.
I started off as a magician, so that's my security background. Did that for a little while. Just did development work, kind of had some security involvement with that, and getting some for acquisitions, kind of up to standard in the security sense, and doing some anti-cheat, cheat detection work. But this was back in like 2010, so not like the anti-cheat stuff that's going on now at all. And then I started getting into the security consultancy work, doing a little bit more vuln research, largely AppSec focused.
So I'm an independent researcher, doing binary level research, bug bounties, that sort of thing. I haven't worked professionally for like a consulting firm or an internal security team like a red team or blue team or anything like that. So I'm going to be taking on the role more of asking questions related to that, where I have that gap in the experience. I started out with PS4 as a foothold. I have some write ups and stuff focused out there, and then moved into independent research.
Yeah, on that
So
note, actually, you've been what? You've been learning the exploit dev stuff for, I want to say, 5-6 years. Would that be accurate?
I don't think it's been quite that long.
Not
I
quite.
think it's closer to three, around three on the exploitation. In development, though, that's probably closer to 10 years.
I could have sworn we played an Eco Party CTF in 2016.
I think that was when I was just starting out at the end of 2016. So yeah, around 3 years.
Okay.
What do you think the percentage is of people getting into information security from video game, either hacking or anti-cheat or patching, cracking,
It's
console
got to be
hacking?
high. I have no estimate on what it is, but
But I
I
mean,
mean,
you
game
you
hacking
listed
is,
yourself, and pretty much how I got into it as well. So
yeah, like
I think
game hacking is a huge, sorry Specter, but it's a huge entry point.
Yeah, I was gonna say, especially if you include like the cheat oriented stuff. I know so many people who got started there and then moved into security once they kind of got bored with the game stuff. Um, I think that's definitely, if you had to pick a route that was the most popular, I would say that would be it. I don't think it's very common for people to transition from just straight like development work into security directly. Although I guess that is kind of the path that you took, right? See, so
Well,
it
I
still
mean,
happens, but
when we're talking professional, yeah, I came out from dev. I mean, I was involved with security, and I mean, I started learning about like the exploits back in like 2001, 2002, well before I started working, just in my teens. Well, I guess I did kind of still come that from development. It was somebody pointed out that some code I posted online was vulnerable, and I'm like, that's interesting. And started digging into it.
yeah, I think if I had to choose a catalyst looking back, I think you were actually the catalyst that pushed me to doing security from development. So that one's a little bit easier for
Well,
me to set
there
up.
we go. I can call you my protege.
There you go. So I think it'll be good to start off with talking about some of the types of jobs that are even in the industry before we start talking about like what it's like working in it and stuff like that. So I know Z, you kind of like to draw a boundary between two, main areas of focus, being network
Yeah.
security and app security.
Yeah, because we often talk about pen testing as like, if you think about professional hacking as a job, you probably think about pen testing. And pen testing is often only used, or is often used with a focus on network security, doing the whole network wide assessment. Company has you come try and either break right into their network, maybe starting off inside as like an internal, see what damage you can do, but like looking at the entire network, And it kind of ignores the whole side of like, finding O days is often being done by the guys in application security, focusing on some specific application or maybe a suite of applications and having that real focus in on that and just looking at that one area. So I like to at least make people aware that there is a distinction between network security, application security. I think Droogie, you also want to point out like about red teaming.
Yeah, well, just there's a difference across the board, right? And I guess my issue with the term red team is everyone has their own definition of it. And in reality, like a quote unquote red team would be, adversary emulation, and you have multiple people on a team with various specialties because to perform the full chain of the emulation, you need people who specialize across the realm and with application security network. Um, but yeah, I lost my train of thought.
Yeah, well, I can kind of carry on a little bit there with red teams. Like, yeah, there's a lot. Actually, I'll even expand on that a little bit. Red team doesn't really have a really solid definition, but I'd even argue like pen testing is really misused too. Like
Yeah,
some people
that's
would.
where you run into vuln assessments versus a pen test versus what I guess just somebody just trying to poke at something internally, but that's not their actual job, right? Like they're on a team and they have a task, but on the side they like to mess with security, right? There's like people that you'll end up talking to who are like that, where they're passionate about security, but it's not their actual job. I don't even know what you define that as.
Well, hobbyist, I suppose, is what I'd say. But I mean, just the terms in general across the industry are, I think, pretty poorly defined. I mean, I always find it a little bit annoying. One place I used to work, they'd sell out the services as application pen testing. Just like we don't do any real penetration of anything. It's like, we test the perimeter, of the specific application, and unlike a network security pen test where you're like, pivoting around the network and actually penetrating a bit. Like I feel like it's just widely misused, and that's the same deal with the red team. It can mean so many different things. But generally speaking, I kind of agree. Like it is more of a blended assessment that involves professionals in several or experts in several different areas.
So, would you say in professional experience that you would fall more on the application security side than the network security side? Or
That's definitely where I fall. I've done a handful of things that involve NetSec, but it's never been really an interest of mine or something I've wanted to get into. I much more enjoy the application security, and that's kind of where I've focused all of my work.
okay, what about you, Droogie? Would you
Yeah,
say about the same?
I'm more or less in the same boat. I definitely had the few years under my belt where the focus was, network pen tests on like internal networks and externals. But actual interest and main focus now would be application security. Yeah.
Okay. So one of the things that I've, kind of liked with independent research is, the ability to manage your own hours. For example, if you want to go on vacation or something like that, you don't have to ask or be beholden to somebody for that time off. You just go and do it. So I did kind of want to lead that into what it's like working in the industry, like working for a company. Regarding like work life balance and stuff like that. Would you say that it's a fair work life balance in your experience in those kinds of companies?
So I can only speak on behalf of a consultancy because that's the only experience I've had. I've never worked on an internal team anywhere. And in terms of consulting, there's not a great balance there. And the reason is that you're constantly changing engagements, constantly dealing with new customers, new projects, seeing new things that you have to learn, read up on, and basically stay on your toes. And due to that, you're constantly improving your self knowledge and working on things in your free time. There's never really going to be a free couple weeks where you're not kind of paying attention to this stuff or working on it.
I guess that's my experience on the consultancy. Like you already know that I've taken like nice long vacations, like 4 or 5 months long at a time, if not longer. And I've kind of had that flexibility. So I do think it depends on the type of company that you're working on. Obviously, though, as a consultant, you're making money when you're on a billable project for some client. Whereas on an internal team, there can be more downtime. There can also just be more kind of busy work. Most of my experience when it comes to the internal team just comes from either friends who are on some of those or a little bit of kind of staff augmentation that I've been pushed onto, which were generally the worst projects to be on in my experience.
Yeah, the staff hogs definitely aren't fun. And yeah, I guess a little bit comes down to just personality wise as well. Like I know myself, I tend to, like, years ago, like, if I were traveling for a customer and I showed up on site and, I'm doing an internal network pen test and it's getting, um towards, like, the end of, like, the first week, and if I don't have domain admin yet, like, I'm putting in long days until I have domain admin or until I compromise PCI data or got something critical because generally I just kind of internal networks are like Swiss cheese, and if you're not making really good progress, I feel like you're messing up, right? So maybe I just hold myself to like a weird higher standard just personally, so then I end up just grinding harder. A lot of that might have to do with it, as well as just like you said, when you work in a consultancy, your job is that you are being billed out to a customer for billable services. So for that to work, for you to be employed, you have to be profitable. So you have to have skills. So if you want to be uh, very valuable to the company, you'd want to make sure that you're billable across many services. So a lot of the times in between work, I'm working on becoming more billable and just more experienced across different services.
Yeah, I think that's kind of one of the benefits of doing the consultancy work is that you get the exposure onto a lot of different technology stacks because you are constantly switching. You are forced to kind of keep yourself up to date with what's happening in the development industry, what's happening in the rest of the security industry, so that you can be available to do several different types of projects. I do think that's kind of a benefit in terms of the work-life balance. It definitely varies from company to company. Like, I generally have felt like I've had a pretty good work-life balance. I've never been pushed to be available outside of like normal hours or work extra long hours. Like, maybe part of that's just on the AppSec side. Like, maybe popping a shell could be an equal to getting the domain admin when you're just focused on the one application. But I've always treated most of my projects as let's follow through. I've got my methodology, my process for all of that. Let's just follow through with that. What I find is what I find. And generally I wasn't concerning myself too much with the specific goal of like popping a shell. It's what issues are here and just spending whatever time seemed reasonable on that. I didn't tend to pull too many long days. I would definitely pull some odd hours since nobody was, especially when working remote most of the time, nobody's really holding me to a 9 to 5. So I know for a while I was working like midnight to 8 a.m. But that was just personal choice.
Yeah, I've definitely had the weird hours. They're not very common for me, but just when the customer is demanding some strange schedule for some reason, or international customers. But yeah, I mean, I guess the caveat there is that I have to admit that my issue with the balance would be kind of my own fault. Like you saying, you're not forced to be doing any of that. I've never been asked to do any of that or forced to do it. I've just been sitting there going, uh, I want more findings. I want to, I want to
Yeah,
understand this better. Like I've been like in ATM labs where they're asking me like, "Can you go?" Because we want to go home and grab dinner, and I'm just like, but reversing this, and I'm so close. Like,
yeah,
I'm not
I
going to
get
bed.
that. It's totally like, I guess I haven't been forced to do long hours. I have done long hours, especially when you get trapped on. You get nerd sniped. Where you
Nurse
just kind
snipes
of
100%. Yeah.
yeah, where you just kind of get trapped in, like, you're working, you're in the zone, you're maybe reversing something, maybe just playing around with something you know isn't right, but you can't figure out how to exploit it. Yeah, you definitely, or I will definitely spend some extra hours there. But when it comes to like, I'm usually being captured by something that I'm working on rather than feeling like I need to have another finding. At least
Yeah,
that's
that's
been my
that's true.
approach.
Yeah, and for me as well, it also depends on where I am because I tend to travel quite a bit for work. So if I'm in a city where I have friends or family, I will likely be leaving at the end of the business day to go have dinner with a friend or something. But if I'm just somewhere solo and I don't know anybody in the area and after work I'll go do dinner or something, but places are open late, that those are where I'll tend to kind of just burn more hours because I'm more entertained by driving further into the project than I am to go back to the hotel and watch a movie or something.
Yeah, definitely. I can relate to that. The other way I'd kind of take it is when we're dealing with on the consultancy side, like you're getting all of this exposure to a bunch of different projects. I just want to tie that into kind of working with the internal teams. I generally push people to try being a consultant rather than applying for like a bunch of internal teams because when you're internal, I mean, this doesn't hold if you're say internal team at Google or some like massive company. That is a little bit different. They generally have some pretty good programs, but a lot of internal teams tend to you're looking at the same stack all the time. You're maybe even writing up the same reports all the time, finding the same sorts of issues just across like, your the company's 100 or 200 applications. Like everybody's doing the same wrong thing, or we just update the TLS specification that everybody needs to follow. So here's 50 reports about that going out. Whereas on the consultancy side, I think you kind of get a lot more variety. Um,
100%. That's why I'm still a consultant. I mean, consulting, they say it's a young man's game. I don't know if I'm considered a boomer now. I'm 30, 31, but like,
Ancient.
yeah. But the variety, the fact that I can have because you have to remember, not every project's going to be fun or interesting. But you still have to do it. It's your job, right? So if you're on some internal team and you're looking at some silly application that you don't really care about much, well, I mean, you're going to be looking at that for the next 2 years because that's your job at that company. And at least me personally, I tell people you probably want to work somewhere at least 2 years before you dip, but that's debatable. Um, but that's kind of why I'm still consulting because I can every 2 3 weeks be seeing something totally different and find cool projects that drive me. And of course, every once in a while, you'll have the longer engagements that are 3 months long or 6 months long. But at least in my case, those are relatively rare, unless I'm specifically asking for it because it's some sort of device or application that I'm specifically very interested in.
Yeah, so I kind of maybe continue that on with, what does the normal day look like for you?
So I guess it depends on the engagement, but schedule wise, if there aren't meetings, being scheduled, which generally we just kind of have status meetings on Fridays, I usually end up working late hours and sleeping in. So um, my day is just kind of like doing the grind at night. And since I'm used to working at home, the Corona change has not really affected me much because when I'm not traveling, I'm at home anyways. And so I tend to work long hours regardless. So I just kind of on a standard work day, wake up, um, and I won't do long stints. I'll do multi-hour stints, and then I'll take a break. Maybe
Yeah,
play video games for a little bit.
kind of
You know,
grazing on your work in a sense.
yeah, like watch a movie and then come back. Um, and I do end up working very long days when you actually chalk up the hours, but I actually find, at least for myself, the way my brain works. This just works better for me because if I'm hitting a wall and I'm trying to understand something and I'm just not really making progress, I'll change what I'm focusing on and start looking at something else. And this is similar to like CTF challenges where I don't know how many times I've hit a wall on a CTF challenge, then changed categories and started looking at something else. And then while I'm looking at the other one, I like figure out the solution for the previous one and I go back. It's just kind of like frees up my brain and I might stop hitting the wall and think about it a bit differently after taking a break or going and taking a shower.
Yeah, that's actually like one of the piece of advice I tend to give people just when it comes to working in general, either doing the vuln research, doing an assessment, is take breaks. I've had exactly the same experience. You get stuck on something, walk away from it for a bit, either work on something a little bit different, completely different area, something, you come back to it, refresh, and usually some new insights will come during either while you're away, while you're working on something else, or close to when you kind of come back to it, or at least that's also been my experience.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
really big on those, especially for like code review engagements. You're looking at like a really large code base and you're not familiar with it. Um, uh, you know, quick 5-10 minute coffee breaks. Um, those are those are super helpful.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, one thing I'd add that maybe people overlook is the fact that reporting is also part of the work, reporting and presentations. You get to do the findings and then you get to write them up. I think
Yeah,
on, like, I'd argue probably close to 20% of my time, maybe a bit more, would be on reporting. So,
yeah,
like
the
a day
amount
a
of
week.
like newer people who are kind of starting that I've worked with, like some of the juniors, the amount of them that just don't really understand that concept and they don't want to work on the reporting. And you have to kind of sit them down and explain to them that's what the customer's paying for. You have to be able to document not just what your results are, but like what you did overall, what your thoughts are, what your methodology was, your observations across the board, recommendations, what next steps. Um, all these things, as well as just an analysis of all the findings that you have. Perfect examples of that would be trying to explain to teams that, hey, I have like these three issues that are all kind of considered low, but when you chain them together, it leads to code execution or something on some sort of machine, which now suddenly those chained issues lead to a critical, because you happen to have them all. And that's a major thing, and you spend a lot of time documenting and reporting. I tend to take extensive notes while working on the engagement, and I take a lot of screenshots while doing it all. And then, usually at the end of each day, I try to document roughly the findings for that day, so that at the end, when I'm doing the full report, it's not so bad with everything at once. I try to kind of knock out piece by piece as I'm going along.
Yeah, I would kind of work off of a test plan myself. So, like, I would just kind of leave all my notes in the test plan if I'm testing for some case or some issue. Like, here's where I found what, and note it like that. But that just kind of comes down to personal methodology. One misconception, though, is you don't spend a lot of time writing exploits. You might be finding the vulnerabilities, but weaponizing it is generally not what your client's going to want to pay for. They're looking for you to find the vulnerabilities to let them know what they are. Maybe you show the case of like chaining some of them. But, especially when we talk about the binary services, they're not really paying for you to spend, a few days actually weaponizing something. They just want to have enough to kind of go and fix it. And I think that's also on like the network pen test side. Like you might spend some time on like a web app or some sort of soft target, but you're not going to spend a lot of time digging for O days in that case, because odds are the client doesn't even own or can't even fix the vulnerability you're finding. They're just going to pass it off to a vendor. So it's like they're paying for you to test the vendor then.
So
Yeah, no, or go ahead.
I was just gonna say that that's one thing I kind of wanted to get into was we talked a lot about the consulting and internal team side, but I think there are some big differences when it comes to independent research, where you can allocate that time, right? there are definitely people, including myself, who thought going into internal teams that they would be able to spend some of that time writing those weaponized exploits, and it's just where they're paying you for your time, you don't really own that time. You don't really get to decide if you get to, do that exploitation. Whereas when you're an independent researcher, you can allocate as much time into it as you want because you're getting paid for the final product, right? Um,
Yeah, and I'll toss
Yeah.
on there, like your research teams also do kind of have not quite the same flexibility. You might be more focused on either stating where you're going to do your research or being told where to do some research. But in terms of doing that weaponization, the exploit stuff, like the research teams can also, uh, like working on that side of things, can also kind of spend more time there. Sorry, I kind of cut you off, Droogie.
No worries. I was just going to say, you guys are spot on. I think maybe 10 years ago or so, you'd kind of see this trend where, at least I did with some of our customers, where they had this like prove it mentality, especially in the embedded realm, embedded and SCADA realm of if you find a vulnerability, they pretty much, unless you exploit it, they don't really care type deal. And they really had a prove it mentality. And that went on for a little while, like a year or two. And now they pretty much take your word for it. They don't want to waste money letting you weaponize that exploit or taking it beyond just a basic POC. So generally, yeah, the amount of times I've been asked by a customer to um, to actually exploit something and work on an exploit in recent years, like in the last 5 years, maybe three times. It's very very rare.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think I've ever been asked to actually work on weaponizing it, but I have pushed back a couple times when they've argued something wasn't necessarily an issue, and that's pushed me to do the weaponizing.
Yeah, that's
But
a good
I've
point
seen the
too. I've
same
I've had
thing.
those scenarios. Yeah.
So the biggest divide when it comes to working for a consulting firm or an internal team and doing independent research, especially if that research isn't getting funded, is you're not getting paid stable income, right? You're getting paid for finished products. You're getting paid like if you don't find any bugs, you're not getting paid, basically. So I mean, you have control of your time, you have that additional flexibility, but that unstable income is, kind of comes with the turf. So I guess, Drugi, a question for you would be, would you ever consider doing independent work for that flexibility, or would you not want to have to deal with some of that that instability, I guess, when it comes to income?
So by independent work, if you're strictly discussing bug bounty platforms,
Yeah, let's say bug
um,
bounty for the sake of it.
uh, I feel that that is a terrible idea to try to have a career based on bug bounty platforms because it is not stable. It is a lot of times, at least with the public bug bounties, if we're talking about like HackerOne and BugCrowd, not stuff like Microsoft's bug bounty, right? Where you're doing, security against the OS internals and you find vulnerabilities and you get larger payouts. But the people who are actively trying to live off of like BugCrowd and HackerOne type stuff, I don't know. I've seen too many nightmares of people trying to debate if issues are actual issues or not. Sometimes you don't have the full picture. Like maybe to you it seems more critical than it is, but to them it only affects like something that they don't really care much about, so they don't really want to pay you out. I've heard stories of people finding vulnerabilities that lead to the massive payouts, and the companies come back just saying that it's literally out of their budget to pay them. There's been a lot of nightmares like that, and I think it's great for side cash. I think it's great for practice and stuff, but trying to do it as a career, in my opinion, is not a great idea. And that might just be me being very risk averse myself, but the other thing with the bug bounty programs that I've seen is that a lot of it, with the public ones, not the private ones maybe, but the public ones, is that it's more of people exploiting the actual bug bounty platform itself. It's like they'll find something where they didn't specify that they won't pay out for,
They'll try to
some
loophole
silly
it.
issue. Yeah, and or another thing would just be they're basically looking for the misconfigured box that's in the slew of 15,000 hosts out there on the internet, and then they find that one box, and they get paid, and you're competing with all these other people who are doing that, and a lot of them have it automated in some fashion. So yeah, it doesn't seem comfortable to me at all. Now, if you were talking about doing research on some of the larger bounties, like OS internals type research, and you had specific goals, and you could kind of figure out, okay, if I'm gonna quote unquote bill my time to go after this target, and if I find vulnerability X, they'll pay out $30,000 or something. I think in some cases that could be profitable, um, and you could pull it off. But I feel that the kind of bug crowd, hacker one, people on Twitter saying to do bug bounties realm is kind of like this facade, where it's like this weird mirage of hope where people it's like a California gold rush where everyone thinks that they're gonna like dive in there and make $1 million off of a bunch of cross-site scripting bugs. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I agree. As you're saying there, like I don't tend to recommend doing like those low bounties like Bug Crowd, like Hacker One. Yeah, there might be payout, some larger payouts there, but generally speaking, if you're able to pull those off, you're probably just get a job paying, at least 100, 150,000.
I
Um,
think you'd make way more money just
oh,
getting the job.
well, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, like, there's so much less stress when you have just the job. You're getting paid regardless of what you find. You might find things that end up being worth quite a bit more, but that's kind of how it goes. But yeah, like it's a lot of grinding for the bug bounties. You're competing with other people. Although I do also agree, like if you're focusing on the more, I'd even say just binary level bug bounties, they tend to pay out more. So when we're talking about like the Microsoft or like a Hyper-V bug bounty, like that I tend to draw a distinction between versus more or less like web app NetSec bounties that you see on Hacker One. You generally don't see that low level stuff and high pay. What I want to say Hyper-V will pay out like 200, 250,000 for
Around there.
Yeah, I think
some of
it's
the
that.
top
Yeah.
bugs.
Yeah, it's funny. The web ones, the like I've seen people on Twitter who have literally said, "Hey, look, I did this write up," and somebody like verbatim submitted it to like a bug platform, to get paid and stuff. And it really is just kind of this race of monitoring WordPress vulns. And the moment a WordPress plugin vuln drops, like, well, did you have your database of all the scanning that you've done over the last 3 months, where you know where all those WordPress sites are that had that plugin? We'll go hit them all real quick and then submit them all, and then you just made, I don't know, 15K or something. And I guess there are people that are doing it and they're successful at it. I guess to me it just seems kind of stressful and um, really I mean, and that's also not interesting to me. It's like weird, like skitty race stuff. I don't know. So it's a strange one. Um,
Yeah, I kind of
for
mentioned
example,
it. Oh, I kind of mentioned during one of our podcast episodes, but one of the Hacker One millionaires, I forget who it was, but he mentioned that like his specialty was finding the IDOR stuff. And it's like for me, I don't know if I could do that. Like just looking for that type of issue all the time and reporting it, like just doing that grind.
oh, dude, that'd be
You're on
terrible, man.
autopilot, basically.
Yeah, you'd have to be on drugs and just out of your mind, like to just grind that out like that. I don't know. Like for me, like the WSL vulnerability is a perfect example where I have a career, and I saw some new code get dropped, and I thought it was interesting to look at. I was not even paying attention to bounties or anything. I found a vuln, I emailed it to them, and then they got back to me and they were like, "Hey, this happened to be eligible for a bounty. Here's $8,000." And it's just like, "Oh, cool.
Nice.
That's a nice fuzzing workstation. I'll grab now." Like it's just like that side cash right there. And I think that's like a perfect example of, like you said, kind of like the binary application um, stuff. There's less competition. It's more technical, thus also higher payouts, because the issues tend to be more critical. Um, yeah, if you're really going to go that route, I'd say focus on kind of OS internals like that.
Something I think a lot of people overlook as well when it comes to bug bounties, and this is even when you move into like Microsoft and the Hyper-V stuff even. Something people don't seem to consider is that you're really beholden to the company on when you get paid. It's not, it's not like you submit a report and then you get instantly paid when it's, they confirm that they received it and are looking into it. It could take a company or like a review team 5, 6 months to triage an issue and get it resolved before you're paid out. So that is another example of why it's not a great idea to base your living around bug bounties is this actually happened with Jonas Lick on Twitter with Microsoft specifically. He spent money that he thought he was going to get that he didn't end up getting for way longer than he thought. He didn't get
Yeah,
paid out for
terrible
like 8
idea.
months. And it's like that's how you kind of fall into that trap. And a lot of people don't consider that. You don't control when you get paid. You get paid whenever the vendor you submit to deems fit. So that's something that you need to consider with independent research and bug bounties as well.
Yeah, and I can't even like I can't gripe Microsoft for that, right? Like you said,
No,
they're triaging the bugs, they're trying to figure
it
out
can take
what the
time,
actual
especially if it's a
impact
complex
is.
issue.
Exactly. So it's like, yeah, you can't expect them to just suddenly cut you a check next week. So yeah, it's unfortunate that that's happening to people, but I mean, that just that's I think that's them just like not really understanding the game they're in.
Yeah. So, jumping a little bit back to the consultancy, I do have one question where I haven't really worked in it. So, generally, you have like web security, you have application security, so let's say like mobile and stuff like that, and then you have binary level issues. What would you say the work split is between those? The reason I ask is because I love binary stuff, and I'm not as much of a fan on the web and app front. I just don't find it as interesting personally. But I feel like binary is probably pretty rare in consulting, right? So what would you say like the split is between those three?
When we've been saying application security in my head, I was including binary to that. So
Okay, fair enough.
yeah, I think it depends on the consultancy. I can speak on behalf of my employer, where uh, obviously I think you're going to have more web across the board at most places because web is easier to find people needing. It's easier to schedule out, and they're short stints, and they're cheaper. So there's going to be more people getting that service. I think you're going to see quite a bit of web, but that doesn't mean that every person at the company is stuck doing web, right? Like myself, I don't these days. I rarely ever get thrown on like a web application type scenario. Um, at least for my employer, we have a lot of embedded work. We do hardware stuff. So if you were to talk to some of my coworkers and say, "How often are you reversing a binary and reversing firmware?" It would very likely be nearly 90% of their work is what they're doing um, on a regular. And so it's difficult because you're kind of getting into the realm of what is that specific person billable in. Like there might be somebody who wants to try to break into um, more reversing type work, or wants to break into more low level code review stuff. They want to code review OS internals or something like that. Um, well, if they haven't proven themselves, then you have to find the right scenario where you can bring them on for either a shadow or have them with more experienced people, and until they like that you can leverage them for that type of work. But I think across the board, you're going to have more web, more network stuff. But at least in my scenario, we have a ton of embedded work, hardware, code review for low level code.
I'll say
So yeah,
mobile applications are kind of on the rise, or at least I've seen more and more over the last like 5 years. I mean, obviously, mobile does have the web component. Oftentimes, mobile applications just kind of a front end to communicating with like a REST API or something, which then has most of the web issues. But it is worth mentioning, like, different consultancies are going to have different focuses. Like, you've got some very boutique firms that really only do like one or two things. So if you have a very particular interest, you can look to getting into one of those very specific companies.
yeah, those are very rare though, because it's difficult to profit and fund your company off of that one category because you have to be able to bill out that much work throughout the year and pay for everyone's salaries
Yeah,
and
so
generally nobody's cheap in those specialized cases, right?
yeah, so like the one category maybe isn't a good example there, but like different firms are going to be known for different things.
Yeah, 100%. Um, like I know of some people who they went and started their own firm and they were like, we're going to start a company and we're only going to do cool hardware stuff. We're only going to do cool low level stuff. And I said, sounds great. Like, I hope it works out well. And when you can afford me, hire me and I'll do all the cool stuff with you. And, now I look at the type of work they're doing and it's like, yeah, I'm sure they get the cool stuff every once in a while, but the majority of their work is staff hog, web stuff, architecture stuff, because that's what pays the bills, because that work is out there and they need to make money.
Okay. So we are approaching over 40 minutes, so I think we will move into wrapping it up. Any last minute thoughts though that you'd want to add on there that we didn't touch on yet?
I guess just the realities of uninteresting work. Uh, Sometimes you get people who um, they tend to join a team and they really only want to work or focus on one thing. They want to be specialized in one thing, and that just tends not to fly unless you find a specific team for that. I've talked with other friends, other companies where they'll be like a web shop and they have somebody who's really into OS internals, and it's just like, well, you have to go find the right company to work on those OS internals. I think in that case, that person went and got an internal job at Microsoft doing security, which was like perfect for what their interest was. So I would just say, the grass isn't always greener on the other side, obviously, and just kind of being uh, realistic in your mind of why are you getting paid to do what you're doing, and how do you offer value to who is paying you to do that, and you'll quickly realize that does not mean spending 3 weeks working on that cool vulnerability that you found. It's really just kind of getting the job done, finding issues, and offering value.
Yeah, I guess I'd only really add, there's somewhat of a grind to the work. Some of it's just you've got to do those jobs you don't enjoy, and occasionally you get the good stuff.
Got to take the good with the bad. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, and I don't know if you want to tie this in with this topic or not, but I would just say I think it's similar to like a developer. Like how many people do you know that say that they want to get into computer science and be a developer, but they actually hate programming and loathe it, and they just don't want to do it at all. It's got to be very rare, because how do you find somebody who's able to go through all that and learn it all, um, and still get the job? I think in security like this, it's similar. I really don't think you'd be able to get a job like one of these unless you are actually very, very interested and driven to do it.
All right. So we'll wrap it up there. We'll be back in 2 weeks with a follow up video, kind of touching on some of those points regarding getting a job in offensive security, some of the insights into the hiring process and whatnot. So these videos go up on Thursdays bi weekly at 8 a.m. Eastern. So you can keep a lookout for those. We also have the podcast on Mondays at 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Pacific, live streamed. They also go up as VODs on 6 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays as well. And we will see you guys in the next discussion video, which we will also have Droogie on for.